It was supposed to be just another quiet afternoon at the elementary school, classrooms humming with the soft buzz of children's voices, the distant ringing of bells, the occasional burst of laughter echoing down the halls. But when Mr. Henry, the janitor known for his gentle smile and worn-out boots, pushed open the door to the girls' restroom to mop the floors, he didn't expect to hear the sound of muffled sobs. Hidden in the farthest stall, knees tucked against her chest, was a little girl with tear-streaked cheeks and eyes that seemed far older than her years. At first, he thought she might be lost or scared of getting in trouble, like many children are when something goes wrong. But there was something about her silence, the way she clutched a crumpled piece of paper to her chest, that made Mr. Henry's heart skip a beat. He gently crouched down, speaking in a calm voice, and she finally slid the note under the stall door. What was written on that note would not only shake him to his core, but sent a ripple through the entire school that no one saw coming. This wasn't a cry for attention. It wasn't a case of forgotten homework or a classroom misunderstanding. It was something deeper, something that had been hidden behind forced smiles and perfect attendance. Mr. Henry had seen a lot in his life, but nothing could have prepared him for the secret this young girl carried in silence. And in that moment, he knew, if he turned his back now, no one else might notice until it was too late. What he did next would not only change her life, it would challenge the very systems meant to protect children like her. Because sometimes, it's the invisible ones, the overlooked and unheard, who carry the heaviest burdens. And sometimes, it takes the quiet heart of a janitor to uncover the truth when everyone else is too busy to look. Stay with this story, because by the time you reach the end, you'll never look at a school hallway or a janitor the same way again. Mr. Henry held the note in his rough, calloused hands, the edges damp from the girl's small fingers. He unfolded it slowly, careful not to tear it. At first glance, the handwriting was uneven, like someone had written in haste or fear. But it was the words themselves that made his breath catch. "Please help me. Don't tell anyone. He said he'd hurt my mom if I talk." Just 10 words, but they hit like 1,000. The room around him seemed to blur, and for a moment, all he could hear was the ticking of the wall clock and the pounding of his own heart. The girl, still hidden inside the stall, hadn't moved. She didn't cry out or speak again. She waited in silence, as if her fate hung in the balance of what this janitor would do next. Mr. Henry knew he couldn't just walk away. His instincts, honed over years of quietly observing the forgotten corners of the school, screamed at him. This wasn't something he could ignore. But he also knew how delicate this was. If he alerted the wrong person, it might make things worse for her. He took a slow breath and crouched down, his voice a whisper. "You're safe now, honey. No one's going to hurt you while I'm here." He didn't ask questions. Not yet. Children like her didn't trust easily. Trust had likely been broken too many times before. Instead, he waited, showing her patience, letting her feel in control for the first time in who knows how long. Minutes passed. Finally, a tiny hand pushed open the stall door. Her eyes met his, full of fear, but also something else, hope. She stepped out in her worn shoes, her uniform slightly torn at the hem. Mr. Henry noticed the faded bruise peeking out from under her sleeve. His stomach turned. This wasn't just a cry for help. This was a scream muffled by silence. He gently asked her name. "Emily," she whispered. Just 6 years old. She looked like she carried the weight of a lifetime. He didn't pry further. Not yet. What she had already shared in that note was more than most adults could say in a courtroom. As he walked her down the hallway, away from the bathroom, he made a silent promise to himself. No matter what it took, he would protect her. He'd been overlooked his whole life, just a janitor, just a guy with a mop. But maybe that was why she chose him. Because sometimes the quietest people are the ones who truly listen. And he was listening now, with everything he had. Mr. Henry didn't take her to the principal's office. Not yet. Something told him to wait. The school had protocols, yes, but not every system was built to protect someone like Emily. He led her instead to the small janitor's closet where he kept an old, battered chair and a mini heater for cold mornings. He sat her down gently, grabbed a juice box from the fridge he kept for his long shifts, and handed it to her without saying a word. She looked at it, then at him, then took it with shaking hands. The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence where two people understand each other without needing words. Emily took a few sips of the juice, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal unsure if it was really safe. Mr. Henry sat down on a crate across from her, leaning forward slightly. "You did the right thing," he said softly. "You were very brave to write that note." Her lip trembled, and for the first time, her voice cracked. "I didn't know who else to tell." That broke something in him. She had dozens of teachers, counselors, even classmates, but she had chosen him, not out of status or position, but out of something deeper, instinct. Somehow, she'd known he would care. He asked if she felt okay to talk a little more, but she just shook her head. So he didn't push. Instead, he told her about his dog, Max, who used to hide under the bed during storms. "Sometimes we all need a place to hide," he added. Emily gave a faint nod. She understood. Mr. Henry needed to make a decision. He couldn't just keep her hidden. But rushing into action might cause panic or, worse, alert the wrong person. He thought about the faculty, about which teachers might actually listen and which might dismiss this as a misunderstanding. Then he remembered Mrs. Carter, the school nurse, kind, quiet, and trusted by every student who passed through her door. He stood and told Emily gently, "There's someone I think you'll like. She's nice, and she's safe. But only if you say it's okay." Emily hesitated. Then, slowly, she nodded. That single motion gave him permission, and in that moment, he knew this little girl had more courage in her than most grown men he'd met. As he stepped out to find Mrs. Carter, he took one last look at Emily. She was staring at the note she had written, her small fingers tracing the words. That note had started something, and now, nothing would ever be the same again. Mr. Henry walked briskly through the hall, scanning the corridor for signs of Mrs. Carter. The last thing he wanted was to explain why he was looking for her, at least not yet. He reached the nurse's office and gently knocked. When she opened the door, her calm, familiar face gave him a sense of relief. "Mrs. Carter," he began, lowering his voice, "I need you to come with me." Quietly. No questions yet. "Just, please trust me." Her eyes widened, but she nodded without hesitation, grabbing her cardigan and following him down the hallway. As they approached the janitor's closet, Mrs. Carter noticed a shift in his energy. Mr. Henry was always steady, always collected. But now, there was urgency, like something delicate was unraveling. When he opened the door, she saw the little girl seated in the corner, her knees drawn up to her chest, clutching a piece of paper. Her heart sank. She didn't ask questions. Instead, she knelt down beside Emily, offering a soft smile and a voice filled with warmth. "Hi, sweetheart. My name is Linda. Is it okay if I sit with you for a while?" Emily glanced at Mr. Henry, then back at the nurse. Her tiny head gave a hesitant nod. That was enough. Linda sat beside her, close but not too close, creating a safe space with her presence. Mr. Henry leaned against the door, arms crossed, his eyes never leaving the girl. Every second felt like it carried the weight of a lifetime. Linda didn't rush anything. She simply asked if Emily wanted to show her the note. Emily handed it over, her hands trembling again as if she knew what giving it away meant. Mrs. Carter read the note slowly, her eyes welling up before she even reached the end. Her throat tightened, but she kept her face steady. She reached out and placed a hand gently over Emily's. "You're not alone anymore," she whispered. "We're going to help you, but we'll only do what you're okay with. Nothing will happen without your say." That sense of control, of agency, was everything to a child who had likely been robbed of both for too long. Mr. Henry watched as something subtle but powerful shifted in the room. For the first time, Emily's shoulders lowered just a little. Not much, but enough. It was the beginning of something new. The first thread of safety being sewn into a life torn apart by fear. He had seen countless things discarded during his shifts, trash, papers, broken pencils, but nothing as fragile or as vital as this moment. Mrs. Carter gently asked Emily if she felt comfortable answering a few questions. Emily didn't speak. She only shrugged, a tiny, reluctant motion. Linda nodded in understanding. "That's okay. You don't have to talk. You can just nod or shake your head." She began slowly, carefully. "Is the person who hurt you someone in your home?" Emily nodded. "Is it someone who lives there with you all the time?" Another nod. Each answer was a quiet dagger that twisted deeper into the hearts of the two adults sitting before her. Mr. Henry turned his gaze to the wall for a moment, his jaw tightening. He'd heard stories, rumors, even whispers, but nothing prepares you for the moment when a child confirms the darkness with nothing but a nod. Mrs. Carter continued, asking if this person had ever heard her before. Emily nodded again. Then, finally, she whispered something so soft, so raw, they almost missed it. He said I deserved it. Her voice cracked, and then she began to cry. Not the quiet kind from a bathroom, but the kind that racks a child's entire body. Mrs. Carter pulled her close, not as a nurse now, but as a human being. You did not deserve any of it, she said firmly. Nothing that happened is your fault. Mr. Henry walked forward, placing a comforting hand on Emily's shoulder, but also anchoring himself. This wasn't a problem to be cleaned up with gloves and bleach. It was the kind that left stains no one else could see. And yet, something in Emily's cry wasn't just pain. It was the release of a secret that had nearly drowned her. After a few minutes, Emily wiped her face with the sleeve of her shirt. Her breathing steadied. Mrs. Carter asked if she would feel okay coming with her to a quieter room in the nurse's office, where she could rest and talk more if she wanted. Emily looked to Mr. Henry again, her silent protector, and he gave her a gentle nod. She stood up, still small, still trembling, but no longer completely alone. And as they left the janitor's closet, Mr. Henry stayed behind for a moment, taking in the silence that remained. He looked at the chair she had sat in, the juice box on the floor, and the crumpled tissue in the corner. These were artifacts of something sacred, a moment where a hidden truth had finally found the light. As he locked the door behind him, he felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He wasn't just a janitor anymore. He was a witness, and witnesses don't walk away. Mrs. Carter led Emily gently down the hall, her small fingers gripping the nurse's hand like a lifeline. They passed colorful artwork pinned to the walls, and the faint sound of distant laughter from classrooms that carried on, unaware. Emily didn't speak, but her eyes darted from door to door, as if expecting someone to jump out from the shadows. Every sound, every footstep, made her flinch. Mrs. Carter noticed. She paused near a side corridor, crouched beside her, and said, "No one here is going to hurt you, sweetheart. I promise." They reached the nurse's office, a soft-lit room that smelled of antiseptic and vanilla air freshener. Mrs. Carter closed the blinds and turned off the fluorescent ceiling lights, replacing them with a small desk lamp to create a more comforting space. Emily sat on the padded cot in the corner, her legs swinging slowly. Mrs. Carter brought over a blanket, clean, warm, and floral-scented. "You can rest here as long as you want," she said. Emily nodded faintly and curled under the blanket, pulling it up to her chin like armor. Meanwhile, Mr. Henry stood outside the door, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. His mind was racing. What now? What came after the truth was revealed? He knew the school had policies, but policies didn't carry empathy. He had seen too many children fall through the cracks, slip between meetings, buried in paperwork, forgotten in the system. He didn't want Emily to become another file in a drawer, another name on a case list. He wanted someone to see her, the way he had. Inside, Mrs. Carter sat at her desk, carefully reviewing her next steps. As a mandated reporter, she had to notify the proper authorities. But she also knew the system could be cold and procedural. She had contacts, people she trusted, and she would call them directly. Her first call would be to a social worker named Danielle, someone who had a reputation for compassion and results. But before dialing, she turned to Emily one last time. "Would it be okay if I talk to someone who can help?" she asked softly. Emily's response came after a long pause. Then, with a small nod, she said, "Only if you and Mr. Henry stay." That single sentence sealed everything. It was trust, fragile and trembling, being extended again. And in that moment, Mrs. Carter knew this child didn't just need a savior. She needed a team, a circle, a quiet army that would fight with kindness and truth. And she was ready to fight. Danielle arrived less than 20 minutes later. She didn't come with a clipboard or an intimidating badge. She wore jeans and a warm smile, her curly hair pulled back, and her voice soft enough to fold into the quiet room like a lullaby. "Hi, Emily. I'm Danielle. I help kids who are really strong, just like you." Emily didn't say anything at first, but her eyes didn't show fear. She was measuring, testing, trying to decide if this new adult was different. Danielle sat cross-legged on the floor, not towering over Emily, but bringing herself to eye level. She didn't ask questions immediately. Instead, she pulled a little sketchbook from her bag. Sometimes, when words are too heavy, pictures can help. Do you want to draw something? Emily blinked, surprised, then slowly reached for a crayon. She didn't draw a house or a person. She drew a locked door. It was simple, made with short, sharp lines. When she looked up, Danielle nodded gently. That's a very strong picture. Meanwhile, Mr. Henry lingered just outside the room with Mrs. Carter. He couldn't hear much, but every now and then, a soft voice would slip through the crack in the door, reminding him that the child he found crying on a bathroom floor had found the beginning of her voice. Mrs. Carter placed a hand on his shoulder. You did something important today, she said. You saw her. That's more than most people ever do. He didn't respond immediately. His eyes were glassy, staring at nothing. I almost walked away, he whispered. Danielle didn't rush. She let Emily draw, let her be quiet, let her speak when she was ready. When the child finally asked, Will I have to go back? Danielle answered honestly, Not if it's not safe. We're going to figure this out together. But you get to help decide what happens next. That kind of empowerment was rare in a child's world, but Danielle knew it was necessary. Trust couldn't be demanded. It had to be earned, brick by brick, word by word. And as the sun began to shift through the windows, casting golden patterns across the walls, something in Emily's expression changed. She didn't smile, not yet, but her posture softened. The locked door she had drawn remained on the page, but in the corner, she began sketching a small key. Unfinished, hesitant, but there, a quiet signal that maybe, just maybe, the first lock had been turned. The key in Emily's drawing did not go unnoticed. Danielle leaned in slightly, studying it with the kind of attention that told Emily her art meant something. It wasn't just scribbles on a page. That's beautiful, Danielle said softly. What's the key for? Emily shrugged, but her eyes lingered on the sketch. She didn't need to answer. The metaphor spoke for itself. For a child who had been trapped in fear and silence, even the idea of a key represented possibility, of escape, of healing, of freedom. Outside the room, Mr. Henry sat on a wooden bench in the hallway. The day had taken a toll on him, though he wouldn't admit it. He rubbed his face with both hands, trying to steady himself. He had faced broken toilets, flooded classrooms, and angry parents, but nothing like this. Yet somewhere in the whirlwind of it all, he felt a strange kind of clarity. This moment, this child, had given his quiet life a depth he hadn't known he needed. He wasn't just cleaning a school. He was helping save a soul. Back in the office, Mrs. Carter sat beside Danielle now, both women gently guiding Emily into conversation. They didn't dig too deep, but each shared sentence added another stitch in the fabric of trust being sewn. Emily spoke about her mom, how she worked late, how she didn't always know what was happening. She didn't blame her. She just wants us to be okay, Emily said. That single sentence was loaded with complexity, both a defense and a plea. It was clear her mother, too, might be a victim in this web. Danielle began explaining what would happen next, not in frightening legal terms, but in child-sized concepts. We'll talk to your mom. We'll make sure you're safe, wherever you go. And if you want, Mr. Henry and Mrs. Carter can be part of the process, too. Emily looked up at that. Can they come with me when I leave school today? It was such a simple request, yet its weight landed like a stone in the room. She didn't want to be handed over. She wanted an anchor. She wanted them. Mr. Henry was called in again, and when he re-entered the room, Emily gave a small smile for the first time. It was brief, almost shy, but real. He knelt beside her cot and said, I told you, you're not alone anymore. And this time, she believed it, because for the first time in a very long time, she wasn't. The school bell rang, marking the end of the day. Backpacks rustled through hallways, sneakers squeaked across linoleum floors, and lockers slammed shut. But inside the nurse's office, time moved differently. Emily remained seated between Mr. Henry and Mrs. Carter, the presence of Danielle nearby, providing a calm, unshakable energy. The world outside was moving on, unaware that inside this room, a life was quietly changing course. Danielle made a call to Emily's mother, choosing her words with great care. She explained that Emily had been found upset, that there had been a disclosure of concern, and that it was important they speak in person. Emily listened closely, her eyes fixed on Danielle's face. When the call ended, Danielle looked to her. "Your mom is on her way. I didn't tell her everything yet. I want her to hear it from someone who understands." Emily nodded. There was fear in her eyes, yes, but also relief. She didn't have to be the one to explain it alone. As they waited, Mr. Henry told her about a tree behind the school that he used to sit under when he needed quiet. "It's still there," he said. "Strong roots. It's been through storms, lightning, everything, but it's still standing." Emily asked, "Is it big?" He smiled. "Huge, but it started small like you." She looked thoughtful, imagining it, perhaps seeing herself in that image. A seedling, battered by wind, somehow holding on. The sound of high heels echoed in the hallway. Mrs. Carter stood first. Danielle opened the door slowly to greet the woman standing there. Mid-30s, tired eyes, coat slightly askew, worry etched into every line of her face. Emily's mother stepped inside, her gaze instantly finding her daughter. "Emily," she whispered. Danielle guided her to a chair and gently began explaining. The woman's hands flew to her mouth as the truth unraveled. Her child had been hurt right under her nose, and she hadn't known. Tears flowed. Apologies were whispered. But this wasn't about blame. Not now. It was about next steps. Danielle laid out options, support systems, safe places. Emily's mom looked at her daughter, and then at Mr. Henry and Mrs. Carter. "Thank you," she said, her voice cracking. "Thank you for seeing what I missed." Mr. Henry didn't say much. He simply gave a quiet nod, knowing deep down that sometimes the most important things in life begin with noticing the smallest signs. Emily sat quietly on the cot as her mother cried, unsure whether she should comfort her or stay still. Children often carry the emotional weight of their parents, and Emily had been no exception. She looked to Danielle, unsure of what was expected of her now. Danielle noticed the hesitation and gently said, "You don't have to carry anyone's sadness, sweetheart. You've already carried too much." Emily's eyes filled with tears again, not because of pain this time, but because someone finally understood what no one had ever said aloud. Her mother reached out, but Danielle gently intercepted. "Let's take this one step at a time," she said. Emily's safety and sense of control are what matter most now. It was difficult for her mother to accept that she wasn't the one in charge of her daughter's comfort anymore, but deep down, she knew Danielle was right. She looked across the room at Mr. Henry and Mrs. Carter, people who had protected her child when she hadn't even realized there was danger. Gratitude and guilt mixed like oil and water in her expression. Danielle continued explaining the next actions. "We'll have to talk to law enforcement," she said, "but there's a way to do that without re-traumatizing Emily. There are special investigators trained to speak with children. It will happen in a safe environment, where she can stop at any time." Emily's mother nodded, her face pale. "And what about where she'll stay?" Danielle turned to Emily. "What would make you feel safest for tonight?" Emily looked down, unsure, but then she whispered, "Can I be with my mom, if Mr. Henry and Mrs. Carter are there too?" It was an unexpected request. Danielle looked between the three adults. "We can't promise that exactly," she said gently, "but we can make sure your mom gets support and that you're not left alone." Mrs. Carter offered, "If Emily's mom is comfortable, I can stay with them tonight, just to help, so Emily feels safe." Mr. Henry added, "And I can check in tomorrow. I'll be at school early." It was a small promise, but for Emily, it meant everything. For once, adults weren't talking around her. They were with her. The day had started with a bathroom stall and silent tears. It had unfolded into confessions, drawings, and revelations. And now, as the sun sank behind the school building, a new kind of stillness settled in the room. One not of fear, but of fragile hope. Emily's world hadn't been fixed, but the door she once believed was locked forever had opened just a crack. And through that sliver of light, a future had begun to take shape. As the building emptied and the janitor's cart sat forgotten in the hallway, Mr. Henry found himself retracing his steps to the bathroom. Something drew him there, not duty, but memory. He stepped inside and stood for a long moment in the quiet. The stall door where he had found her was still slightly ajar. The small, cracked tile where her note had slid under shimmered beneath the flicker of an overhead light. He crouched down and looked again, as if expecting to find a second note. But the space was empty, physically at least. He pulled out a clean cloth and slowly began wiping down the sink, not because it needed it, but because his hands needed something to do. Each movement was meditative, almost sacred. He had been a janitor for over 20 years. He had seen gum under desks, ink-stained walls, and food fights gone wrong. But never had he felt so deeply that his presence had made a difference. Not through words or reports, but through being there, quietly, when no one else was watching. In another part of the school, Mrs. Carter helped Emily pack up her backpack. She made sure her stuffed bunny was tucked safely inside, along with the drawing she'd made, the door, and the key. "Keep this," she said. "One day, when you feel ready, maybe you'll draw what's behind that door." Emily smiled faintly and nodded. The drawing, though simple, had become a symbol of silence broken, of secrets shared, of courage finding voice. It wasn't just a page anymore. It was the beginning of a new chapter. Danielle walked with Emily and her mother out to the car. The parking lot was quiet, the sky awash in dusky blue. As Emily climbed into the back seat, she turned and looked up at Danielle. "Will I see you again?" she asked. Danielle smiled. "As many times as you need." That promise lingered in the air, even as the car pulled away, taillights glowing in the fading light. There were no dramatic goodbyes, just a sense that something important had been set in motion, and it would not be forgotten. Mr. Henry stepped out into the cool evening air and looked toward the edge of the schoolyard, where the tree he'd spoken of earlier stood tall and steady. It had been through storms. It had weathered winds, and yet it still reached toward the sky. He thought of Emily, how she'd chosen to speak, how she'd found her own kind of strength. And in that moment he smiled, because the world hadn't changed, but she had. And sometimes, that's where everything begins. The following morning, the school hallways buzzed with their usual rhythm, morning announcements, backpacks thudding into lockers, and chatter bouncing between classrooms. But for Mr. Henry, the day felt different. As he walked through the corridors, mop handle in one hand and coffee in the other, his thoughts weren't on leaky faucets or scuffed floors. They were on Emily. He hadn't expected to sleep at all the night before, but when he did, he dreamed of a small locked door and a trembling hand holding a key. In the nurse's office, Mrs. Carter sat at her desk early, already preparing for the day. She had brought in an extra set of clothes, just in case Emily returned and needed them. There was also a small stuffed animal tucked discreetly behind her chair, one she'd kept in a drawer for years, never used until now. It wasn't about pity, it was about comfort. She knew children didn't heal in straight lines, and that the smallest gestures often left the deepest marks. Emily arrived just before the first bell. She wore a long-sleeved shirt, her backpack held tightly against her chest. Her mother walked her to the door, but let her go inside alone. That small act, that permission to walk the last few steps on her own, was no small thing. Emily's eyes scanned the room until they found Mrs. Carter. No words were spoken. Mrs. Carter simply smiled and opened her arms. Emily ran to her, and the hug that followed was long, silent, and full of meaning. Later that morning, Mr. Henry was sweeping near the cafeteria when he felt a tug at his sleeve. He turned and saw Emily, eyes wide and unsure. She didn't speak, just reached in her backpack and handed him something folded. Another note. This one wasn't crumpled or torn. It was written with care, on clean paper, in handwriting that was steadier. He opened it slowly. It read, "Thank you for finding me. No one ever found me before." His throat tightened as he folded it again and slid it into his shirt pocket. He didn't say much. He just knelt down and said, "I'll always be looking, Emily. Always." She nodded, then turned and walked back down the hall, her steps just a bit more confident. And in that moment, Mr. Henry realized that what he'd done, what they had done, wasn't just rescue. It was recognition. It was telling a child who had learned to disappear that someone finally saw her. And that was something no system, no report, no procedure could ever replicate. Later that week, Danielle returned to the school, not with official paperwork, but with purpose. She wanted to check on Emily, not just as a caseworker, but as someone who had witnessed the beginning of a transformation. She found her in the library, sitting alone with a picture book open in her lap. The librarian gave Danielle a soft nod and left them alone. Danielle approached quietly and sat beside her. "That looks like a good book," she said, peeking at the cover. It's about a mouse who escapes a trap, Emily replied. Danielle smiled. Smart mouse. They talked for a while. Not about the case, not about the past, but about books, dreams, and drawings. Emily showed her a new picture. It wasn't a door this time. It was a bridge. On one side was a stormy cloud, dark and heavy. On the other side, a field of flowers and a tree that looked familiar, tall, sturdy, unshaken. Danielle asked, "And what's the bridge made of?" Emily paused. "People," she answered. "People like you. And Mr. Henry. And Mrs. Carter." Danielle blinked, her chest tightening with emotion. Outside the library, Mrs. Carter and Mr. Henry stood watching through the window, unseen by the two inside. "She's stronger than we think," Mrs. Carter whispered. Mr. Henry nodded. "She always was. She just needed someone to see it." They stood in silence for a while, watching a quiet victory unfold. Not with fanfare, not with awards, but with the simplicity of presence, of showing up, of not looking away. Later that afternoon, during recess, Emily sat under the old tree behind the school, the one Mr. Henry had told her about. She brought her drawing pad with her and began sketching the same tree, but now with something new, a tiny swing hanging from one of its branches. The sun filtered through the leaves, casting patterns on her paper. Other kids played nearby, but she wasn't alone anymore, not in the way she used to be. That tree had withstood storms, and now so had she. That evening, as the sky turned shades of lavender and gold, Emily sat by the window at home, her sketch pad in her lap. She no longer drew locked doors or storm clouds. Tonight, she was sketching faces, Mr. Henry's kind eyes, Mrs. Carter's gentle smile, Danielle's warm expression. Each line was drawn with care, not for realism, but for feeling. These weren't just people to her. They were proof. Proof that someone had heard her cries when the world had been silent. Meanwhile, Mr. Henry was sitting in his small living room, the note Emily had given him resting on the table in front of him. He'd read it more times than he could count, each reading pulling him deeper into reflection. It wasn't just about one child. It was about all the children who had crossed paths with him in the hallways over the years, some laughing, some silent, some who might have needed help and never found the courage to ask. He wondered if he'd missed signs. That question would stay with him. At the school, Mrs. Carter stayed late that night, organizing supplies in the nurse's office. She had made a quiet decision to create a small, safe space inside her room. Not just a cot or a first aid box, but a corner with blankets, books, and soft lighting. A place where any child could come not just for physical care, but emotional safety. She didn't announce it to the staff. She didn't need recognition. She just wanted it to exist, for Emily, and for anyone else walking through pain in silence. Danielle, at her desk in the Child Services building, updated Emily's case file with tears in her eyes. She had seen so many tragedies, so many children who never got their justice. But sometimes there are stories like this, not wrapped in perfection, but woven with real steps toward healing. She wrote, "Child has a visible support system, emotional resilience evident, ongoing care recommended, strong potential for recovery." Then she paused and added a final sentence. "Hope initiated through human connection, non-clinical." Far from the world of statistics and reports, Emily placed the final touches on her drawing and taped it to her bedroom wall. She didn't know if everything would be okay, but she knew she wasn't invisible anymore. And for the first time in her young life, that was enough to fall asleep without fear. The following week brought a new rhythm for Emily. She began arriving at school earlier, walking a little taller, her backpack no longer clutched like a shield. She greeted Mrs. Carter each morning with a quiet, "Hi," and sometimes even stayed after class just to help her sort bandages or arrange her shelf of children's books. She didn't say much about what had happened. She didn't have to. Her presence was a sentence in itself. "I am here. I stayed. I'm healing." Mr. Henry began noticing her drawings showing up in unexpected places, taped to the teacher's lounge door, slid under the library counter, and once, tucked inside a locker he had to repair. Each one was different, but they all shared a theme: bridges, trees, open doors, and always, people holding hands. He never said anything when he found them. He simply smiled, folded them carefully, and added them to a small box he kept in his closet labeled "Worth Everything." One afternoon, during a fire drill, Emily got separated from her class for a moment. The crowd, the loud alarm, the sudden rush, it was all too much. Panic tightened her chest. She froze. But then, through the sea of students, she saw Mr. Henry, calm, steady, unmistakable. Their eyes met, and without a word, he walked toward her, knelt beside her, and said, "It's okay. I see you." And just like that, the fear dissolved, like a shadow disappearing in the light. After the drill, Mrs. Carter met them near the back entrance. "You okay, sweetie?" she asked. Emily nodded and took a deep breath. "I just didn't know where I was for a second." Mr. Henry smiled. "But now you do." She looked between them and added, "I knew you'd find me again." Those words carried power, not just for her, but for them too. Because finding her once was a miracle. But being someone she expected to come back for her, that was trust built over time. As the students filed back into classrooms, the school returned to normal. But for Emily, nothing was ever normal again. And that was a good thing. Because what she had now wasn't a return to the old world. It was the start of a new one. One where her voice mattered. One where locked doors no longer kept her silent. One where the people around her weren't just passing faces, but roots, firm, grounded, and growing alongside her. Emily's transformation didn't go unnoticed by her classmates. Some began to whisper about her. Curious glances in the hallway, the occasional murmur of, "That's the girl the nurse always checks on." But Emily didn't flinch like before. She met the stares with quiet resilience. She had no need to explain herself. When a girl from another class finally approached her during lunch and asked, "Are you okay now?" Emily simply nodded and replied, "I'm learning to be." It was the kind of answer that made people stop and think. In the teacher's lounge, Mrs. Carter overheard two staff members discussing Emily. One of them, Mr. Dorsey, the history teacher, commented, "I heard the janitor found her crying. Can you believe that?" The other replied, "Just shows sometimes the people we think are background end up being the most important." Mrs. Carter didn't interrupt. She just smiled to herself, proud that Mr. Henry was finally being seen, not for what he did, but for who he was. That afternoon, Danielle visited again, this time to speak with Emily's teacher and check in on how she was doing academically. What she heard was more than encouraging. "She's more focused," the teacher said, "more curious, and her writing assignments are powerful, not always happy, but honest." Danielle smiled. Healing rarely looked like perfection. It looked like honesty, like trying, like a pencil scratching across paper, telling the truth a child couldn't yet say aloud. Emily, meanwhile, had started keeping a small journal. She didn't show it to anyone, but every page was a victory. Sometimes it was only a word. Other times, a full paragraph. "Today, I felt nervous in music class, but I remembered Mr. Henry said I could always count to 10. So I did." Or, "Mrs. Carter said I looked strong in my new dress. I didn't feel strong, but maybe she saw something I didn't." The journal wasn't meant for anyone else, but one day, it might be. At home, her mother had begun attending therapy sessions, encouraged by Danielle. She was learning to listen, to unlearn silence, and to ask better questions. The guilt still haunted her, but she was trying. And sometimes, trying is more powerful than apologies. When she tucked Emily in that night and whispered, "I'm proud of you," Emily whispered back, "I'm proud of you too." It was a small exchange, but it carried the weight of everything they had both survived. One crisp morning, the school announced a student art showcase. It was an annual event, usually filled with drawings of rainbows, pets, and stick figure families. This year, Emily asked her teacher, quietly, if she could submit something different. "Of course," the teacher replied, though she had no idea what to expect. What Emily turned in was a detailed pencil sketch of a bathroom stall door cracked open, a hand reaching through it, and another hand gently taking the note. It stopped people in their tracks. The drawing was displayed in the center of the hallway gallery, surrounded by colorful art from other students. Emily's piece didn't use color. It didn't need to. The rawness of it spoke louder than any rainbow ever could. Students passed by in silence. Teachers looked at one another, some with tears in their eyes. Mr. Henry paused in front of it longer than anyone else. He recognized his own hand in the picture, the way it had reached down without expectation, without knowing what would come next. Mrs. Carter stood beside him, arms folded, eyes glistening. "She turned pain into power," she whispered. Mr. Henry didn't reply at first. He simply reached into his pocket and pulled out the original note, the one that started it all. He hadn't shown it to anyone. He'd kept it safe, folded with care. "She gave me this," he said quietly. "And somehow, I think she knew it would matter forever." Later, Danielle visited the exhibit. She stood in front of Emily's drawing and took a slow breath. The simplicity of it, the vulnerability, it was more than art. It was testimony. It was memory turned into message. She didn't photograph it. She didn't take notes. She just stood there, letting it sink in. And when Emily approached her quietly from behind, Danielle turned and said, "I think this is going to help more people than you know." Emily looked at the drawing again, then said, "It's not just my story. It's for anyone still hiding in the bathroom." That sentence hung in the air like sacred truth. And in that moment, it became clear Emily wasn't just healing. She was becoming a light. Not because she was loud or brave in the way stories usually described, but because she dared to speak when silence had become her only language. And in doing so, she gave others permission to do the same. News of the art showcase quietly rippled beyond the school. A local community center asked to feature the students' work for a weekend exhibit, and Emily's drawing was specifically requested. When the school called her mother to ask for permission, she hesitated. "Are you sure?" she asked Emily that night. Emily nodded. "If people see it, maybe they'll look closer next time. Maybe they'll ask kids how they're really doing." That night, she added a new drawing to her journal, this one of a light shining through a bathroom crack. Mr. Henry offered to help transport the artwork to the community center. As he packed the display frames into the back of his pickup, he was struck by the irony. For decades, he had quietly cleaned the aftermath of children's days, muddy shoes, spilled juice, forgotten assignments. And now, he was transporting a message more powerful than any lesson plan. A message born in the silence of a janitor's closet, wrapped in fear, now echoing through an entire community. At the exhibit opening, Emily arrived holding her mother's hand. She wore a blue sweater, the same one she'd worn the day she handed Mr. Henry the note. But this time, her shoulders weren't hunched. She didn't hide behind her mother. She walked straight to her drawing, looked at it, and stood beside it. People approached. Some asked questions. Some said nothing at all. But every person who saw it paused. And in that pause, something shifted. The artwork was not just a picture. It was a reckoning. Mrs. Carter and Danielle both came that evening. As they stood nearby, they noticed a young boy staring at the drawing for a long time, his father standing just behind him. The boy whispered something, and the father's face changed. He knelt beside his son, speaking softly. Then he looked up at Danielle and asked for a card. That single moment reminded them why they did what they did. Stories didn't just end. They rippled. They reached people who didn't even know they needed reaching. As the exhibit closed that night, Emily slipped a new note into the back of the frame. It wasn't meant to be read, but someone would find it someday. It said, "To the next kid, don't wait. There are people who will believe you. I promise." She folded it carefully, just like she had the first one, and left it there, not as a goodbye, but as a beginning for someone else. Back at school, Emily's days found a new rhythm. She wasn't always cheerful. Some days she was quiet, withdrawn. Healing didn't erase the scars. It softened their edges. But now, when she was quiet, it wasn't fear. It was thought. When she didn't speak, it wasn't because she was silenced. It was because she was listening. And when she smiled, even slightly, it meant something had bloomed in her that day. Something no one could take away. Mr. Henry saw her often, usually sweeping a hallway or fixing a squeaky locker. She would wave now. Not every time, but enough. Sometimes she left him folded pieces of paper with tiny notes. One read, "I saw a girl in the hallway today who looked sad. I smiled at her. She smiled back." Another simply said, "I think I want to be someone who helps people too." He kept them all in a drawer labeled Brave. Mrs. Carter noticed changes too. Other students had begun asking more questions, coming in more often, not necessarily with injuries, but just to sit for a while. She didn't need to ask why. The safe space she'd built had grown beyond the blankets and books. It was a mindset now, a shared understanding. One day, a second-grade boy came in and said, "I don't feel broken, but I feel bent. Can I stay here?" She welcomed him in with a soft nod. Emily had started something. Danielle followed up regularly, ensuring Emily and her mother had continued support. Therapy appointments were consistent, and progress was steady. But it wasn't just the professionals who mattered. It was the people at school. The janitor who never rushed past a child. The nurse who created space to be seen. The girl who dared to draw the truth. They had created a net beneath her fall, and now she walked with the awareness that if she slipped, she wouldn't fall far. One morning, Emily stood in front of her class to present a story she had written. It was fiction, but everyone in the room knew it carried truth. It was about a girl who lost her voice, only to find it in a stranger with kind eyes. When she finished reading, the room was silent. Her teacher, blinking back tears, said softly, "Thank you for being brave." Emily sat back down. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just whispered, "I'm not done yet." And no one doubted her for a second. The seasons began to change. Leaves turned gold. The air crisped with autumn. And with each passing day, Emily seemed more rooted, like the tree she'd once drawn. She began participating in a peer support group at school, one led by a counselor, but shaped by the voices of the students themselves. Emily didn't talk much at first. She listened. She watched. But then, one day, when another girl shared that she felt invisible at home, Emily quietly raised her hand and said, "You're not. I used to feel that way too." Her voice, though soft, carried weight. Word of Emily's courage had spread beyond the community. A local news outlet requested an interview, anonymously, of course, to share the impact her drawing had made. Emily agreed, but only under one condition. They have to know this could happen to anyone, not just me. The story aired on a Saturday night. It featured her drawing, her words read by an actress, and comments from Danielle, Mrs. Carter, and Mr. Henry. The segment ended with a line from Emily herself. "Sometimes the person you ignore is the one who sees everything." The response was overwhelming. Letters poured in, some from other kids, some from adults who had never shared their own stories. One woman wrote, "I was a little girl once too, hiding in fear. Your story made me feel seen for the first time in 50 years. Emily read each one carefully, often pausing to hold the paper to her chest. She didn't answer all of them, but she kept every single one in a small wooden box labeled Voices Like Mine. At school, a teacher began incorporating emotional safety lessons into the curriculum. Simple tools, like how to ask for help, what safe adults look like, how to name your feelings. No one said it was because of Emily, but everyone knew it was. A culture of silence had been cracked open by a 6-year-old girl with a piece of paper. And now, it was being rebuilt with intention, kindness, and honesty. Quiet revolutions rarely come with fireworks, but their aftershocks are deep. And through it all, Mr. Henry remained who he always was, steady, observant, humble. He didn't like being called a hero. "I just did what anyone should have done," he said. But deep down, he knew the truth. Not everyone would have. Most would have walked past the stall. Most wouldn't have noticed the silence inside it. And that's why Emily chose him. Because heroes aren't always loud. Sometimes they carry mops. Sometimes they whisper. And sometimes they simply don't look away. As winter approached, the school announced its annual gratitude assembly, where students were invited to share something or someone they were thankful for. Emily hesitated when the form was handed to her. She stared at the blank lines for a long time. That night at home, she pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, not a form, but one she chose. At the top, she wrote, "The person who found me." She didn't use Mr. Henry's name. She didn't have to. The story spoke for itself. When her letter was read aloud at the assembly, by her teacher, per her request, the auditorium fell into a hush. Students, teachers, staff, and parents all listened as the words unfolded. I was alone in a place where no one saw me. Then someone did. He didn't ask me why I was crying. He just stayed. And that's when everything started to change. A single paragraph. A wave of silence. And then, slow applause that grew and grew until it filled the room like a rising tide. Mr. Henry stood in the back of the auditorium, arms crossed, eyes lowered. He wasn't one for attention. But when the teacher said, "And this person is in the room," all eyes turned toward him. Emily didn't stand. She didn't wave. She simply turned in her seat and looked at him. That look, full of peace, gratitude, and quiet strength, was louder than any applause. Mr. Henry raised a hand, gave a small nod, and then stepped out of the room before the moment swallowed him whole. After the assembly, Emily approached him outside. She didn't speak at first. Then she said, "I didn't write your name, but I think they knew." Mr. Henry smiled. "They didn't have to. I knew." She reached in her coat pocket and handed him something, another folded note. But this one was different. When he opened it, it wasn't a cry for help. It was a drawing, the tree, the key, the bridge, and now 2 figures sitting beneath it. One small, one older, both in quiet peace. Mr. Henry kept that drawing in his wallet. Over time, it wore at the edges, faded in the corners. But he never replaced it. Because some things, like the trust of a child, like a second chance at life, like being chosen to be the one who notices, aren't meant to be preserved. They're meant to be carried. The holiday season arrived, bringing with it lights, music, and the quiet buzz of anticipation that floated through the school halls. But for Emily, it wasn't the decorations or class parties that made this time feel different. It was the warmth she now carried inside her. A warmth built not from gifts or glitter, but from safety, from truth. At home, she helped her mother hang ornaments, each one accompanied by a memory or a hope. And this year, for the first time, she placed one on the tree herself, shaped like a small, silver key. At school, Emily worked on a project titled, "What Home Means to Me." Her classmates drew pictures of houses, pets, families. Emily's drawing was different. It showed a tree with deep roots, branches reaching across the sky, and children resting in its shade. Beneath it, in small handwriting, she wrote, "Home is where someone listens." When she shared it with her teacher, there were no corrections, no suggestions, only quiet tears and a soft thank you. It wasn't just art. It was understanding made visible. Meanwhile, Mr. Henry continued his daily work, pushing his cart, fixing what was broken, cleaning what others left behind. But now he was greeted with nods, smiles, even short conversations from teachers who used to pass him by without a glance. Some kids began waving to him, calling him Mr. H. One little boy even asked, "Are you the one who saved the girl?" Mr. Henry crouched down and said, "She saved herself. I just happened to be there when she needed a hand." Mrs. Carter noticed that more students began visiting her office, not with scraped knees, but with stories. Some just sat and drew. Others came in and said, "I don't feel good, but not in my stomach." She welcomed them all. The ripple that began with Emily had become something greater, an invisible invitation for every child carrying something too heavy to bear alone. She wasn't just a nurse anymore. She had become the keeper of quiet confessions, the anchor for tiny storms. Danielle continued her work in the background, never far, always watching over the threads she had helped weave. She often thought of Emily when working with new children, how one act of bravery could shift the course of a life. And as she decorated her own small tree that year, she added a paper ornament, a drawing Emily had given her. It was a door, this time open wide, with sunlight pouring through. No locks, no fear, just a path forward. With the new year came new beginnings. Emily transitioned to a new grade, a new classroom, and a few unfamiliar faces. There was anxiety at first, the kind that lives in the shadows of old memories. But as she entered the classroom on the first day, she found a familiar face, Mr. Henry, wiping down desks before the bell. She waved. He winked. And just like that, the fear receded, tucked away by the presence of someone steady. She wasn't starting over. She was continuing forward. Her new teacher, Mrs. Lynn, had been briefed on her past, not in cold terms, but with care. "She's been through something," the principal had said, "but she's one of the most insightful kids you'll meet." And Mrs. Lynn quickly learned that was true. Emily didn't speak often in class, but when she did, her words carried weight. One day, when a classmate cried after forgetting their lines in a play rehearsal, it was Emily who sat beside them, simply saying, "It's okay to freeze." I've been there. Outside of school, Emily joined a community art group led by a woman who encouraged storytelling through painting. Her first canvas was simple, blues and grays, with a small patch of yellow light in the corner. When asked what it meant, Emily said, "That's where I started, but I'm walking toward the light now." The group leader later told her mother, Your daughter sees the world in a way most adults never will." Her mother smiled, tears rising. "She's teaching me how to see too." Mr. Henry, in his own quiet way, began mentoring a student who had recently transferred. The boy didn't talk much, seemed angry at the world. Mr. Henry didn't pry. He just offered company. Sometimes, that meant sweeping a hallway together. Other times, it meant fixing a crooked locker door. Over time, the boy began to open up, about his father being gone, about the nightmares. Mr. Henry didn't offer advice. He simply stayed, and it worked. Because sometimes, the most healing thing we can do is not leave. One afternoon, Emily saw the boy sitting alone and recognized something in his silence. She approached, sat nearby, and after a long pause said, "You don't have to say what happened. But if you want someone to sit with you until the quiet gets smaller, I can." He looked at her, unsure, then slowly nodded. They didn't speak again for a long time, but they didn't need to, because some silences are sacred, and in the hands of those who've survived them, they become bridges. Spring arrived with its familiar scent of blooming flowers and damp earth, and with it came signs of renewal everywhere, even within Emily. Her therapist noted the shift in her drawings. More color, more movement, more faces with open eyes. She had begun to explore emotions not just of fear and sadness, but also curiosity, wonder, and joy. It wasn't a sudden change. It was quiet, like the gradual melting of ice. But it was happening, and every page of her sketchbook told a deeper story than words could hold. One day during recess, Emily noticed a younger girl sitting alone on the edge of the playground, staring at the gravel. Something about her posture felt familiar, the tight grip on her knees, the way her eyes scanned the ground instead of the sky. Emily didn't say anything at first. She simply sat beside her. After a few minutes, she offered her a purple crayon she carried in her pocket. "This one's lucky," she said. The little girl took it without a word and smiled. It was a small exchange, but it carried the weight of recognition. Mr. Henry, watching from across the schoolyard, saw it happen. He didn't intervene. He just watched, his hands resting on his mop handle, and felt something bloom quietly in his chest. This was what healing looked like. Not just recovery, but reach. The once frightened child who handed him a note was now silently handing others their first glimpses of safety. She didn't even know she was doing it, but he did, and it gave his work a new layer of meaning with every passing day. Mrs. Carter, too, began working with other staff to develop a new program, a peer listening space where trained students could be trusted to sit with classmates needing quiet support. She had asked Emily first if she wanted to be involved. Emily nodded, but said, "Only if it's not called helping the sad kids. It should just be about listening." And that's what they named it, the listening room. A space with bean bags, art supplies, and permission to be human. Danielle returned for a quarterly check-in, and as she walked through the school halls, she noticed how many small changes had taken root. Posters about emotional safety, a new suggestion box labeled, "Tell us what you need," and, on the main bulletin board, a copy of Emily's bridge drawing. She found Emily near the library and greeted her with a warm smile. "You're doing good things," she said. Emily looked down, then replied, "I'm just passing it on." Danielle nodded. That's how the best stories live. Later that month, the school hosted a Voices of the Students night where children were invited to share poems, stories, or art in a small auditorium filled with parents, staff, and friends. Emily asked to speak last. She hadn't told anyone what she planned to share, not even her teacher. But when her name was called and she walked up to the microphone, a hush fell over the room. She stood for a moment, small and steady, and pulled a folded paper from her pocket. "I used to be afraid of doors," she began, her voice soft but clear, "especially when they closed behind me. But one day, I found one that opened. And behind it, there was someone who didn't ask me questions. He just stayed. So I stayed too. And then, I started walking out. Little by little. The room was silent, many eyes filled with tears, not just from sadness, but from awe. Because in her voice, they didn't just hear a child. They heard truth. She unfolded her paper and read a short poem she had written. Some people shout when they want to be heard. Others whisper and still feel ignored. But the ones who see through silence and stay are the ones who help you find your way. When she finished, The audience didn't erupt into applause. Instead, they stood, one by one, a standing ovation not for performance, but for courage, for survival, for the transformation they had witnessed over the course of a single year. And at the back of the room, Mr. Henry wiped his eyes on the sleeve of his uniform, knowing this moment would be carved into his memory for the rest of his life. After the event, a line formed. Students, parents, and staff quietly approached Emily, not to praise her, but to thank her. One woman whispered, "I have a daughter. Thank you for showing me how to see her better." Another said, "You reminded me that listening matters." And through it all, Emily stood quietly, nodding, saying, "Thank you," and holding tightly to the drawing she had tucked in her coat. One more image of an open door, this time with a bright sky beyond it. And, as the building emptied and the chairs were stacked, Mr. Henry passed by her in the hallway. He didn't say a word. He just gently handed her a folded piece of paper. When she opened it, it was a sketch, his first one ever. It was a picture of the tree, the bridge, and a small janitor's cart parked nearby, with a caption that read, "Still here." Emily smiled, held it close to her chest, and whispered, "I know." In the weeks that followed, Emily's drawing of the open door was framed and hung in the school's main hallway. It wasn't placed there with fanfare. No plaque, no announcement, just quietly installed, like the most sacred things often are. But students noticed. They stopped and stared. Some recognized it. Others asked what it meant. And over time, a rumor began to spread, not of gossip, but of meaning. That's the picture from the girl who was brave. And somehow, everyone seemed to know who that girl was, even if her name was never spoken. Mr. Henry passed by it every morning. Some days, he'd pause and stare for just a moment, not out of pride, but remembrance. That image didn't just show Emily's journey. It showed his too. The drawing reminded him of how much can change when we choose to stop, to ask, to see. Sometimes he found himself touching the frame lightly, as if confirming that it was real, that all of it had really happened, that something broken had indeed begun to heal. Mrs. Carter started seeing more teachers, not just students, visiting her during their planning periods. "I had a student cry during a lesson today," one said. "I didn't know what to do." Another asked, "How do I ask without making them feel ashamed?" These were new conversations, important ones. The ripple had reached the adults, and Mrs. Carter, once just the nurse, now sat with her colleagues like a quiet mentor, helping them understand that emotional wounds deserve bandages too. Emily, meanwhile, was chosen to help design a mural for the back wall of the school garden, a space where students could sit, journal, or simply breathe. The mural would be painted by students and overseen by a local artist. She sketched her ideas with care, hands holding hands, a tree in the center, and in the corner, a small door slightly ajar. "So people know they can leave the dark when they're ready," she explained to the artist. "And there's always someone waiting on the other side." And so, brick by brick, wall by wall, word by word, Emily's story began to live outside of her. Not as a tale of trauma, but of courage. Not as a warning, but as a map. And though she had never set out to lead, to inspire, or to teach, that's exactly what she was doing. Not by standing on a stage, but by sitting with people in their silence, the way someone had once done for her. The mural project became a school-wide effort. Children from every grade added something: clouds, stars, flowers, initials. Even teachers and staff contributed. Mr. Henry, after some hesitation, painted a small broom leaning beside the tree, almost hidden in the shadows. When asked about it, he smiled and said, "It's just part of the story." Emily nodded in agreement. The mural wasn't meant to be perfect. It was meant to be true. During the unveiling, parents and students gathered in the garden. No speeches were planned, but the crowd stood in respectful quiet. Emily's teacher whispered, "Would you like to say something?" She thought for a moment, then shook her head. Instead, she walked to the mural and touched the painted door. That gesture, so simple, became the moment everyone would remember. It said everything. That healing had taken place. That fear had been faced. That courage had taken root in paint and color and soil. That afternoon, Danielle visited the garden on her own. She stood before the mural for a long time, her hand resting on her clipboard, eyes scanning every corner of the artwork. When she reached the tree, she found a tiny hidden detail, Carved into the trunk were 3 small letters. E.H.C. Emily. Henry. Carter. No one had told her about it, but she smiled, knowing that someone, likely Emily herself, had made sure the storykeepers were honored. Inside the school, a new student arrived, quiet, withdrawn, his eyes downcast, his backpack far too heavy for his shoulders. Emily noticed him in the hallway. She didn't approach. Not yet. But she left a small folded note in his locker. If you ever feel like no one sees you, I do. It was unsigned. It didn't need a name. Just like hers hadn't, once. The boy found the note later that day. He didn't smile, but he held on to it. And that's how it continued. Not with dramatic endings. Not with credits rolling. But with echoes, quiet moments of care passed from one to another. Small acts. Open ears. Soft words. Emily wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a seed planter, growing compassion in corners no one else had thought to look. And every person who had been part of her journey was still there, still watching, still protecting. Not from the front, but from behind like roots. As summer approached, the school prepared for its final week. Desks were being emptied, yearbooks signed, and laughter echoed louder through the halls. But for Emily, this ending didn't feel like endings used to. It didn't feel like loss. It felt like growth. She stood in front of the mural one last time before break, her fingers gently tracing the edge of the door she'd painted. So much had changed since the first note. So many faces had entered her story, not to fix her, but to walk beside her. Mr. Henry was busy clearing out storage rooms, organizing tools, and fixing the broken garden hose one last time before vacation. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if he were trying to make this version of the school, this new version, where safety lived in plain sight, last a little longer. Emily approached him during his break and handed him something wrapped in tissue paper. "For your closet," she said. Inside was a small framed sketch, his card under the tree, and on the side, her words, "You didn't just clean the school. You cleaned the silence." He said nothing. He just placed a hand gently on her shoulder. And that was enough. In the nurse's office, Mrs. Carter packed away her cabinet, labeling everything so it would be easy to find next year. She had added a new drawer this spring, comfort items. Inside were soft blankets, coloring pages, squeeze balls, and tissues. As she closed it, she found a note tucked between the folds. It was from Emily, for the ones who come next, so they don't feel like they're the first. Mrs. Carter sat down for a moment, overcome, because that's what legacy looked like, not medals, not titles. Moments. Quiet. Lasting moments. Danielle stopped by on the last day, not because it was part of her job, but because she could not come. She found Emily in the library, surrounded by books and sunlight. They didn't talk about the past. They talked about the future. "What do you want to be?" Danielle asked. Emily shrugged, then smiled. "Someone who notices. Like you. Like Mr. Henry. Like Mrs. Carter." Danielle's eyes welled with tears. "You already are." And as the final bell rang and the school emptied, Emily stood by the front door a moment longer. The hallway echoed with memories, with footsteps, with voices, with healing. And as she stepped outside into the warmth of summer, her hand brushed against her pocket. Inside it, one last folded note. Blank. Ready to be written. Ready for the next story. Summer days brought new rhythms. The smell of cut grass, the sound of sprinklers, the feeling of freedom. But for Emily, there was still structure. Therapy appointments continued. Art classes met weekly, and she and her mother started journaling together in the evenings. Her mother had transformed too. Not overnight, but steadily. She listened more. She hurried less. And she cried without shame when needed. Healing, they had both learned, wasn't a race. It was a walk. A slow, sacred walk. Sometimes forward, sometimes back. Always together. Emily joined a small summer reading club at the public library. One day, she chose to read a picture book aloud to a group of younger kids. The story was about a fox who got lost and found home again through the kindness of others. As she read, one little girl sat very still, her eyes wide. Afterward, she tugged on Emily's sleeve and asked, "Did that ever happen to you?" Emily paused, then nodded. "Sort of. But someone helped me find my way, too." The little girl whispered, "Maybe I'll find someone like that." The two sat together the rest of the hour, reading in silence, their shoulders just barely touching. Emily never asked what the girl meant. She didn't have to, because sometimes you feel pain and others like an echo. And sometimes, the best answer is to simply stay. One warm afternoon, Mr. Henry and Mrs. Carter met for coffee near the school, something they'd never done before. They talked about the past year, about the children, about how much they'd learned. "I thought I was just patching walls and fixing pipes," Mr. Henry said. "Turns out I was helping people stay standing too." Mrs. Carter smiled. "We all were." And Emily showed us how. They toasted their coffee cups like it was a quiet victory, because it was. That evening, Emily sat on her porch with her sketchbook. The page she was working on was unlike any she'd drawn before. It was filled with many small doors, each one slightly open. Behind every door was a different kind of light. And in the corner, one line of text: "When one of us finds our way out, we leave the door open for the next." The final days of summer brought a stillness that felt different than before. It wasn't emptiness. It was reflection. Emily spent those days collecting memories, like seashells, quiet mornings with her mother, drawings of doors and trees, laughter that didn't come with guilt. She'd changed, but she hadn't left herself behind. She'd simply expanded, become more. And as the new school year approached, she didn't feel dread. She felt readiness. Not for perfection, but for possibility. On the night before school resumed, Emily sat in her room, looking over the notes she had saved, the ones she wrote in the bathroom, the thank you to Mr. Henry, the messages from classmates and strangers. They weren't reminders of trauma. They were proof of transformation. Each note a page in her story, each voice a lantern lighting the path ahead. And now, with her pencil in hand, she began writing something new. Not a cry for help, not a secret, but a beginning. A story she would choose to tell. The next morning, when she walked through the school doors, everything looked the same, but felt different. The walls still held laughter and noise. But now, she knew they could also hold safety. Her new teacher greeted her warmly. Her classmates smiled without staring. And in the hallway, just like before, was Mr. Henry, pushing his cart, humming quietly. She walked up beside him and handed him something small, a folded note, taped shut. "Don't open it yet," she said. "It's for later." Mrs. Carter welcomed her with open arms. "The listening room is still open," she said, "and we added some of your favorite things." Emily looked around. The room was brighter, more welcoming. She noticed new bean bags, a jar of kindness notes, and on the wall, a framed drawing of her bridge. "You left something behind," Mrs. Carter said, "so others could find their way." Emily didn't reply. She just smiled, deeply, and for the first time, without holding back. Danielle called that evening, just to check in. Emily answered the phone herself. "I'm okay," she said. "Actually, I'm really okay." Danielle didn't ask for details. She didn't need to. That sentence was the most powerful update of all. And as the call ended, Emily opened a new page in her sketchbook. She drew a school. But this time, it wasn't just a building. It was a beacon. And inside it, doors open, people listening, and a girl walking forward with her head held high. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of school life carried on. Tests, birthdays, group projects, all the things that make up childhood. But behind it all, the quiet revolution continued. Emily had become a peer listener, just like she dreamed. She didn't give advice. She didn't fix problems. She just listened, really listened. And that was more than enough. For some kids, she was the first person who ever really heard them. One day, a girl named Sarah handed Emily a note. Folded small, trembling hands. "Can I give you this?" she asked. Emily took it gently, sat beside her, and said, "Whenever you're ready." It was a moment that mirrored her own beginning, like a circle closing or maybe expanding. After school, she opened the note. The words were simple. "Thank you for not walking past me." Emily pressed the paper to her chest, eyes closed. Another spark, another light, another story just beginning. That night, Mr. Henry finally opened the note Emily had given him weeks before. Inside, in neat handwriting, it read, "You changed my life with silence. You listened when I didn't know how to speak. And now I speak because you stayed." It was the kind of message that sank deep into a man's bones. He folded it carefully, added it to his old box of treasures, and whispered to the empty room, "You changed mine too." Mrs. Carter retired at the end of that year. She didn't tell many people. Just a quiet announcement, a soft goodbye. But on her last day, she found a bundle of notes in her drawer, all from students, all anonymous. And at the very top, a sketch, a nurse, a chair, a child wrapped in a blanket, and a caption, "You didn't just patch us up, you taught us to feel safe." She cried, and she smiled, because that's what legacy looks like when it's built in love. As for Emily, her story didn't end. It expanded, grew, passed on in drawings, in notes, in words quietly spoken between children who had once felt alone. The bathroom stall was no longer a memory of fear, but of beginning. The janitor's closet, the nurse's office, the sketchbook, all artifacts of a girl who turned silence into story. And across the school, in the corner of the mural, someone had added one final brushstroke over the door, a golden key, glowing in the light. Because once a door is opened with truth, it never closes the same way again. Some stories are loud, filled with shouting, sirens, and dramatic rescue. But others, like Emily's, are quiet. They begin in the hush of a bathroom stall, with a crumpled note passed through fear. And yet, it's in these silent moments that the most profound changes take place. What started with a single act of noticing grew into a wave of compassion that rippled through an entire school, reaching teachers, classmates, and even strangers. Because sometimes, the smallest voices carry the deepest truths. Emily's journey reminds us that healing doesn't always look like triumph. It often looks like showing up again and again, even when it hurts. It looks like a janitor who pauses, a nurse who listens, a social worker who stays long after the system says her job is done. It looks like a girl who finds the strength not just to survive, but to help others rise. Her courage was never about grand gestures. It was about choosing to believe that someone might care enough to hear her. And someone did. This story teaches us that no one is too small to make a difference, and no one's pain is too quiet to matter. Every hallway holds someone hiding in silence. Every classroom holds stories that haven't been told. And every act of kindness, no matter how invisible at first, plants a seed that might grow into something life-saving. What we choose to notice, and how we choose to respond, can alter the entire trajectory of another person's life. So if you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or alone, let this story be your proof. Your voice matters, even when it shakes. And if you're someone who walks past others, consider this a call to stop, to look, to stay. Because sometimes, the most powerful rescue doesn't come from someone with all the answers, but from someone who simply refuses to walk away. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something real, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that matter. And don't forget to like this video, so others can find it too. One voice can start a wave, and yours might be the next one someone needs to hear.